A speedboat cutting through black water at nearly 50 knots. No running lights, no flag, just engines screaming into the night. And then suddenly, the ocean lights up. Tracer rounds rip across the surface of the water. The boat swerves, metal shreds, and within seconds, the cartel run is over. This wasn't a movie scene. This wasn't a drill. This was the United States Coast Guard opening fire on a suspected cartel vessel in international waters. And what happened next forced U.S. authorities to quietly change how they confront cartels at sea. Because when Coast Guard teams finally boarded the boat, they realized this mission was never supposed to get this close. The incident happened just before midnight in the Gulf of Mexico, a region that has quietly become one of the most contested smuggling corridors in the Western Hemisphere. According to Coast Guard officials, radar operators first detected a go-fast vessel operating without identification, moving fast, low, and deliberately dark. The exact profile cartel trafficking crews have used for years. But this time, something was different. Instead of turning away when challenged, the boat accelerated directly toward a U.S. patrol cutter. That's when the warning shots started. They were ignored. Moments later, the Coast Guard escalated to disabling fire, aiming directly at the engines. The boat lurched. One engine erupted in flames. The vessel spun violently and slammed sideways into the waves. Within seconds, the chase was over. But the real shock came after the boarding. When Coast Guard teams climbed onto the damaged vessel, they didn't just find drugs. They found military-grade weapons, encrypted radios, satellite navigation systems, and body armor identical to what cartel enforcement units use on land in Mexico. This wasn't a fishing boat gone wrong. This was a cartel operation that had pushed too far. And that's when officials realized something unsettling. This boat wasn't trying to escape, it was trying to assert control. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand how cartels operate at sea. For years, the Gulf and the Caribbean have been treated as cartel highways, low risk, high reward, go-fast boats, semi-submersibles, even narco-subs.
Este es Juárez Costas de los Estados Unidos. ¡Auto su barco ahora! ¡Auto su barco! ¡Auto su barco!
Most of the time, U.S. forces don't fire. They track, they monitor, they seize when possible. But shooting? That's rare, which is exactly why this incident sent shockwaves through security circles. According to internal briefings, this cartel boat wasn't just smuggling. It was operating in an armed escort configuration, something usually reserved for high-value shipments or senior cartel figures. In other words, whatever was on that boat was important enough to die for, or kill for. Witnesses aboard the Coast Guard cutter later reported seeing possible muzzle flashes from the cartel vessel before return fire was authorized. That detail hasn't been officially confirmed, but if true, it changes everything. Because it would mean cartel crews are now willing to directly engage U.S. forces at sea, not evade, not flee, engage. And that crosses a red line. But here's what wasn't publicly emphasized at first. This incident triggered a quiet shift in U.S. maritime rules of engagement. Not announced, not debated, just changed. After the boat was secured, Coast Guard teams recovered multiple duffel bags. Inside, bricks of narcotics wrapped in grease and plastic, standard cartel packaging. But underneath that, assault rifles, high-capacity magazines, an unusually large amount of ammunition. This wasn't just a drug run. This was a floating weapons platform. Officials declined to name the cartel involved, but analysts point to one likely candidate: the Gulf Cartel, one of the oldest and most violent criminal organizations in Mexico, with deep maritime smuggling routes and a history of testing U.S. boundaries. And recently, they've been acting differently, more aggressive, more reckless, more willing to provoke. This incident comes amid a sharp surge in cartel-related maritime activity. In just the past year, the Coast Guard has reported a significant increase in armed smuggling vessels, many operating closer to U.S. territorial waters than ever before. Some boats were carrying drugs, others were empty. Decoys, probe runs, reaction tests, testing response times, testing resolve. And that's what makes this confrontation so significant. It suggests the cartels may be shifting strategy from stealth to intimidation. Think about the message. A cartel boat charging a U.S. Coast Guard cutter in open water, ignoring warnings, possibly firing first. That's not desperation. That's confidence. Confidence built on years of unchecked power, corruption, and profits, measured in the billions. But here's the part most people aren't talking about. This wasn't just a Coast Guard decision. According to security sources, U.S. authorities are now allowing faster escalation when cartel vessels show hostile intent. Why? Because cartels are no longer acting like smugglers. They're acting like paramilitary organizations. Cartels now operate drones. They field armored vehicles. They control territory larger than some countries. And at sea, they're beginning to act like they own the water. The Coast Guard hitting that boat wasn't just about stopping drugs. It was about drawing a line. But drawing a line has consequences. Cartels don't forget, they retaliate. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. And the concern inside U.S. intelligence agencies is simple. If cartels are willing to engage U.S. forces at sea, what comes next? Border confrontations? Attacks on U.S. assets? Or American civilians caught in the middle? We've already seen cartels kidnap U.S. citizens on land. We've seen them traffic Americans unknowingly. We've seen them flood communities with fentanyl. Now, we're seeing them test American firepower. After the incident, the Coast Guard quietly increased patrols across the Gulf. More cutters, more air surveillance, more joint operations with the Navy. Officially, it's routine. Unofficially, it's preparation. Because this wasn't an isolated event. It was a warning shot, not just fired by the Coast Guard, but by the cartels themselves. So now the real question is this: did the Coast Guard stop a dangerous escalation, or did this moment mark the beginning of a much larger conflict? Will cartels pull back after crossing a line they shouldn't have, or will they push even harder, convinced the U.S. won't risk open confrontation? History suggests one thing: they always push, until someone pushes back harder. The waters of the Gulf have always been dangerous, but now they're becoming a front line. And for the first time in a long time, that front line is heating up fast. So let me ask you directly, did the Coast Guard do the right thing? Yes or no? Is this defense, or the first step toward a war with the cartels?